Welcome to the journey of an aesthete, a comprehensive examination of all things aesthetic, the arts, the humanities, and what it means to be human.
Hello, Andy Heintz.
Hey, Mitch.
Welcome to our show, Journey of an Aesthete.
Hey, thank you very much.
I'm glad we got in touch with each other, and it seems you can hear me and I can hear you. And I have I'm going to do a little blurb up front, if you don't mind. I'll try to keep it brief.
Yeah, absolutely.
I have all kinds of guests on my show. I mean, from all walks of life. Usually artists, but not always. Sometimes they're political activists like yourself. I've had Theo Haresh on the show once. I had the philosopher George Kateb, Robert Pippin, people like that, musicians. But, from time to time, I like to have people on the show who are, you might say, more politically involved than the average folk. And you've written an incredible book, Dissidents of the International Left. And you're someone that appears to wear many hats. You evidently have been a sports writer. We could talk about that. I did not know that. And you're a journalist, freelance journalist, and also work with substance drug counseling. Is that correct? Or?
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, I am a addictions counselor at here in Des Moines, Iowa.
You're in the Midwest. That's fantastic.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. I live in Iowa. Yeah.
Wow. Well, there's a lot to talk about. So again, on our show, I like to, kind of give the guests kind of permission or space to talk about what's most important to them. I should say we are recording this on a momentous World Historic Day with the horrors of the attack, the invasion, right, of Russia on Ukraine. And so that's the objective historical context for this conversation. Neither of us knew that was going to happen, of course, when we were doing this episode. But that's what's going on. So politics is very much in the air. Wouldn't you say?
Yeah. It's I think it's a dark day. I was hoping the invasion. I was hoping it would not happen.
Yeah.
But it has, and I definitely encourage anyone who has contacts with dissidents and anti-Putin dissidents in Russia, or has contacts actives in Ukraine. I mean, it's definitely time for solidarity with those people.
Oh, absolutely. Well, that's very connected, of course, to your book and probably other things that I don't even know about. But generally on our show, I like to get things going through a kind of a linear chronology, and I'm just very curious how you came to be the journalist you are, the reporter you are. Your biographical background, were you always political, or is that something more recent, or anything else that comes, that goes into making you Andy Heintz, whatever comes to your mind?
I would say I was apolitical for the most part until college. That definitely was where my politics, I became a lot more political. It was actually, I remember it was a history class. I went to Kansas State University. I'm a Kansan. I'm from Kansas originally.
Oh, wow. So you must know Thomas Frank's work then, or have certainly.
Yeah. We actually read What's the Matter in Kansas in one of my classes actually at K-State.
Right.
But it was actually it was a history class, and he talked about. I remember some of the things he told us about, like that I had not heard, such as like the U.S. invasion of the Philippines, early America, and the coup that overthrew Salvador Allende in Chile in 1973. And passed the Reagan Bush support for Bush 1 support for Saddam Hussein, and that was kind of jarring to me, of all of that. It was just because I had not heard it, and it kind of got me to researching and doing more research, and then I kind of
hold that thought. I just wondered what years we're talking. So you in college, that would have been roughly.
God, it was like 2003 to 2007.
That's so recent to me. It's funny because I'm 54, and it's funny to hear you talk about that because full disclosure, I rarely get into politics on my show because it's really an arts oriented podcast, and it being an arts, it's also unusual for an arts podcast because I have a mission of unity across all the arts and all the styles, which might have political implications. But, full disclosure, in those years, the Reagan-Bush years, my first political activity was working on Jesse Jackson campaign, the 1988 campaign, not the 84. So,
okay, the Rainbow Coalition.
Which was an incredible group. And actually many people today feel it was kind of I feel this way. I feel it was a far superior to even subsequent, some people say it was at strengths the Sanders campaign did not have. But anyhow, I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm just painting the context of where you were. And also at that time I was researching ITT in Chile. Because the film Missing had come out. I don't know if you've seen that film about
with Jack Lemmon. Yeah. I love Jack Lemmon. So
he's fantastic. That's a whole week ago. Save the Tiger, and of course, and he's The Apartment, and
I love The Apartment. That's a great one.
We could do a whole episode on Billy Wilder, or Jack Lemmon. but you're receiving this information in the early 00s, right? 04. So I guess that would be during the W junior years, that kind of after the And you were saying that this was a shock to you. In other words, you were well. You talk about it. You probably could express it better.
Yeah, we'll just. I guess I just shook my sense of what I thought America was. I mean, I guess I kind of, or not. I guess I felt like it was. I guess I felt like we had kind of, I knew slavery in past, but I felt like those are the things that wrongs had more or less been righted, and kind of naively, and that we were more or less on the right path. But like none of that foreign policy stuff, even that whole side of the Cold War, I did not know about. It was just, and that's, and that's. I went to I would say I was pretty well educated. I grew up in the suburbs, pretty upper middle class, I guess. My education was a good one, I think. But yeah, that stuff was unknown to me. You hear about her, knew about the 60s, kind of, in Vietnam. Yeah. It kind of a blah, I knew of it. I wasn't an expert by any means. But just that kind of information kind of hit me, and it led me to doing a lot more research. And the more I went into, for example, like Reagan's politics in like Latin America and El Salvador and Guatemala and Nicaragua, the more I looked into that stuff, and the more I look back in the past history, and it painted a much more complicated picture. Than I originally had.
I want to ask you a more general question because I went to high school in Michigan, which for 3 years. I went to Interlochen Arts Academy back in the early mid-'80s. And that was the extent of my connection to the Middle West. But I'm just wondering what you feel about the environment in the Midwest, how that well, in general, how that might have informed or not informed your education, and what impact it made at that time, because every state's different, and
I have trouble kind of knowing. I mean, that's hard for me to say because I haven't really lived anywhere else. Oh, I've traveled, but I mean, you only get to know a place so much
from traveling
when you're, the brief time you're there traveling. Right. And I've never been to the East Coast. Wow. I've been to the South. I've been to much of the West. Just honestly, because I'm a fisherman. I love the fish. I love the scenery. And but as far as like this is the culture I've been in my entire life. So it's I would say that I think one thing that people forget about the Midwest is like, for example, the politics and the culture. I lived in Western Kansas for a while. Colby, Kansas is called. Like the culture in Colby is very different than the culture in, say, Kansas City or Chicago.
Of course.
Sometimes I think that rural-urban difference is actually could possibly be more different than, say, the difference between Kansas City and New York City. I mean, I think
it's big. Well, I guess all the culture that I love, I'm a jazz musician, I'm a pianist, and I've lived most of my life in the Northeast. I've lived in New York City, Manhattan, of all places. The Big Apple. I've lived in Boston, Massachusetts. So I've spent about as much time there as you have in, say, Kansas and, in Ohio. And it must seem different. It must look different. But I guess
I think it's slower where we are. I think we're slower moving on some things.
So it's almost
maybe slower talking.
Yeah. I mean, sort of like, slower could be good, right? It could be smell the roses.
Yeah, I think it can be good sometimes for sure.
Appreciate what you have rather than rushing, right? Rather than rushing ahead. The thing about it is when you rush ahead, you force others around you who may not want to rush. So that too, and slower pace of
And it's complicated. I lived in Colby, Kansas for 2.5 years, and
wow,
probably one of the most conservative places you can find. But they really took me in too.
Oh, interesting.
A lot of the people, they really accepted me, and I'm sure they didn't agree with my columns, but they.
So were you right?
They took me in as like one of their own, kind of. So I have it's a kind of a complicated relationship with all that.
I was a journalist in the 80s and up through the part-time journalist, up 80s through the late 90s, early 2000s, but a paper in Florida. But it's funny. I love journalists and reporters, and I don't know if this is getting too far off topic, but how did you get to the point of having a column? Was it somewhere between college? I guess tell me about your first job as a reporter, and then you could talk about some of the political differences with your editors, which is interesting. But was it sport? Were you doing a daily?
First place I worked was actually was in a small it's a small town in Oklahoma.
That's fantastic.
And I was really green and wasn't a great typer. I didn't hold on to the job all that long, honestly. I made some mistakes and then they fired me. So kind of packed up and went back to Kansas City, and I eventually got the job back in Colby, where the boss there kind of took me under his wing. Libertarian in the American sense, but took me and him had a bond, and he said, I said, I'd like to write a column. He said, okay. So I ended up being the liberal, kind of the left-wing journalist in Colby, Kansas.
So in a way, you and Kansas were doing what Alexander Coburn used to do at the Wall Street Journal, right? Alexander Coburn was the resident Marxist reporter at the Wall Street Journal I think before The Nation, right? Wasn't it? I think before you wrote for The Nation. But that's interesting. So you were keeping it, representing it in Colby.
Yeah, I mean, well, it was weird. I kind of wore different hats because I go cover the high school basketball game, and then
fantastic.
Then I'd I'd kind of point out that terrorism, and during the Reagan years, sometimes was practiced by, sometimes like some people in Nicaragua we were arming were committing terrorism. So it was kind of an interesting dichotomy.
It is. I mean, of course, depending on what your politics were at that time, although,
Yeah, by that time they had turned pretty. I mean, I'm not a Marxist. I would say I'm a progressive, I guess.
Yeah.
I don't know. There's probably progressives with different views than me, though. But I was definitely to the left of
the people around.
Those people there. Oh, yeah.
So I
think we bonded over fishing, though, and over sports. So, there were these other identities that, I could find common ground with people. So
you've always been a lifelong fisher. Fish.
Yeah. I love it. I love the outdoors. My dad was a biology teacher.
Oh, wow.
Yep. Yeah. So, and my mom was a special ed teacher, so
Oh, wow.
I had a lot of teaching in my family. I have a lot of teachers in my family.
Well, in a way, you're kind of teaching the world, I guess, when you did this book, because I think I don't want to jump too far ahead unless you want to, but in this book, you decide I'm going to pick every continent. So it's, you have a Middle East section and an African section and Asian, you definitely, it's a very comprehensive book talking to all these people. But in any event, you're in Colby and your editor, what kind of arguments or stuff that you guys, when putting aside the fishing, the agreement was that mainly
actually not much.
Okay.
He Steve Heinz was his name, and he was very, very hands off. He let me write what I wanted to write. And God bless, I love him for it. He, no matter, sometimes he'd say he'd disagree with it, and I remember he wrote like we had an argument about something. He wrote a kind of a pro Columbus sort of article, and then I wrote one like anti-Columbus.
Of course.
But he never censored me or anything like that.
Well,
he always
that was a little bit more the culture that in a way you got to live out the last gasp of that consensus culture, right? Of post-war. In a way, if you think about it, you were at the end, you were living because that culture does not exist anymore. It's over, right? It's before Fox and MSNBC. You were like one of the last real reporters, if you think about it. What are your thoughts now that so many commentators talk about the death of town reporting, how we don't have newspapers, and I know.
It's a very real problem, I think, and not just from a political like ghost town standpoint, but in a lot of little papers. I mean, they were part of the town's fabric. They were part of like not just the small town. I mean, one thing you learn, and it's one thing about small town America is that I think is a really cool thing is that like they really get behind their sports teams and stuff. And it's kind of cool, and like the towns, the shops and stuff get behind them. There's and they really love seeing those teams in the paper and their kids in the paper, and a lot of these bigger companies swallowed up a lot of these papers, and or they just treat them as like tax write-offs, and it's just.
Yeah,
it's just people. I feel like people who should are in the newspaper business or people who should be in it are people who have a passion for it, and really. And I feel like some of these people, it's commercial reasons they're in it, and I think that's a tragedy. I think it's.
Oh, it is a tragedy. Well, of course, connected to that is the thing. Timothy Snyder. I don't know if you've seen him speak on this particular issue, but he's very eloquent as of late about what the loss of newspapers means. First of all, it means that people don't basically know the basic facts of their town. They don't know daily events. They actually don't know what's going on where they live. I mean, one of the advantages of having reporters is that basic things like, I don't know, what's in the supermarket, or what the water table is, or whatever. Things like basic things of daily life. And it's kind of weird to have a society where you don't have people covering that, where that's not a legitimate profession or not a respected profession around the country, right?
Well, I think we always, no, I agree. I think the newspaper model, like the advertising model, I think the internet really rocked it. Yeah. And I don't think I don't think there's been really I don't know if we've made an adjustment yet, like how newspapers will survive without strictly on a for-profit basis, competing with, especially with all these conglomerates owning them and competing with the internet. I think it's, I think one thing about I'm certainly believe technology can be used for good reasons, but I think like in my country and like in other countries, I think a lot of us never stopped and had a conversation of like, to what end are we using this for good? Use some of these technologies. Is it for good or bad? And like, I wish we would have that conversation more. I just don't see it happening sometimes. Whether
some, it's not happening, but also, what are memories that coming back to your mind of of your editor, Steve or Colby? Stories that were noteworthy, or events that It could be a sports thing. It could be maybe farms, how farms were doing. What comes in the top of your head that to this day you think back either fondly or not so fondly, or with emotion or interest? I mean, what do you?
I like doing stories just on the kids. I mean, it's kind of nice to do the sports report, or just to like do a sport like on a kid's game, or just a profile on a player, or just like doing a story on something opening up, new business opening up. Just sometimes, I just kind of enjoyed that. You got to know people, and getting to know the city council people, covering those things. And I got along with the folks there, Republican and Democrat. Yeah. And it's just, and I think with local news too, even I think when people are divided on stuff, like I think if you know when it's in your neighborhood, people, you don't like project necessarily the same stereotypes that you would on people who like aren't in your town or aren't living there, which can be a bad thing overall. But like in the town, you can I don't agree with him on this, but he's not a bad guy, because you're these people, you're with them. Well, and the people work from the newspaper.
Exactly. That's that old, I want to have a beer with him, or I want to have a cup of coffee with him or her thing. That kind of hangs across the aisle. The image, of course, today that people use is Tip O'Neill and Ronald Reagan having lunch, and that kind of thing.
Well, it's like
Kennedy and
Tucker Carlson says his bad things about this guy, but I talk to him every day in the neighborhood. He's not that bad, but now it's kind of harder to now, if people don't know each other and aren't talking. I think I do think on the left we did some really good things by, I think, questioning some things about organized religion, questioning some things about patriotism, one kind of family is not the only kind of family to have. Oh, yeah. But I think to some extent I think sometimes we didn't think of the fact of like, if these things are questioned, if people do feel like things that they believed in were questions.
That's right.
What's going to replace it? And like, what kind of environment can we have these kind of conversations? Because if it's a hostile one,
it is a hostile.
It's going to be problematic.
Well, that's getting back to your book. That's what I really mean. Again, your book, I could never do justice to this book. I mean, the audience, the listeners, should get it. But on this subject, Michael Lerner stands out to me from Tikkun, right? Cornel West's old buddy and a Jewish activist, because he talks about that very issue in your interview with him. He talks about, religion, this anti-religious attitude that he struggles against, I guess. What were your impressions of Michael Lerner? I guess because we're on the subject, he kind of. Yeah.
I mean, overall, I think on that sentiment, I definitely agree with him. I think, I wish there were more conversations between more religious people who have progressive type politics and more secular people. I wish there was more conversations there, more dialogue. I think there's, to me, things like religion and patriotism, I think they can be used for good and bad. Mm-hmm. And I think everything has both. I mean, like a lot of secular people who are universalists believe in universalism, and I would put myself in that category. Mm. Some things in the New Testament, Old Testament, I certainly disagree with. But sure. There are also parts of it that are, love thy neighbor, love the stranger, that have universalist implications. I mean, mm-hmm. Treat, the golden rule. I mean, there's some beautiful stuff in there. Yep. And just to throw it, you don't want to throw that all out, to me is a terrible idea. Yep. I don't think you have to take it all literally.
Right.
Or even believe in a deity to not get the wisdom that comes from those books, and like some of the good morals that come. And I just, I think sometimes I think reason and science is needed for progress. But I think without a culture stresses life, that where people feel like they have a belonging and a purpose.
Yeah.
I think that needs to be there too. I think you need all three of those things. I think sometimes, like the Sam Harris's kind of, or there's kind of this idea that if we can all just be scientifically rational people, and I'm not sure if that's true.
Well, you and I have had conversations before about Sam Harris. As you know, he's an influence on this podcast because I actually like more for his style, more for how he is with guests as an influence on me, and a little bit how he goes into detail. How he goes into detail in an episode with the guest. I appreciate that, and he comes prepared. I like that. Mm-hmm. Those are good things. But putting aside his so-called new atheism or militant atheism, which is a whole other. I mean, it's interesting to hear you talk about that because I'm wondering. I'm wondering how much you seem to have a very balanced, healthy perspective on these things, and I'm wondering, does that come from your experience as a reporter, or do you think that played a role, or your how you were raised? I think it's partly how. Well, I think it's partly how I was raised. My mom is one of the most empathetic people I know. And that's probably something I hopefully got from her. Mm-hmm. And my grandma is very much trying to see the best in people. And I think I have some of that. But I think my dad is very much a person who doesn't trust absolutes. He thinks there's shades of gray, mm-hmm. and he's someone who doesn't, who's kind of taught me to see complexity in things, which I think helps keep me from seeing people as entirely bad. Mm-hmm. And I think that's when I worry when I see things kind of as like a zero-sum game arguments. Yep.
Because I feel like progressives, religious progressives, and secular people, we can argue and have, some things we can contest and stuff, but there's still a lot of roads that we have agreements too. So I don't.
Yeah.
And I think Twitter and Facebook are just horrible.
Yeah, they are.
They're not horrible in themselves necessarily, but they're horrible for that kind of thing because you can just kneecap somebody. Well,
they're set up to create fights and wars. I mean, they're engineered.
Yeah, and it's
for that purpose.
It's just not a good model for. Yeah. Reasoned debate.
I try to not use them that way. I try to use them just to tell people when a concert is, and to post.
Yeah, which is probably the way it should have been done. And I'm guilty as anyone as being on a soapbox, but I try not to get into arguments on there either because I just don't think you're not going to solve things with with Facebook messages.
It's really great to talk about all this because I'm getting a picture of someone who is developing as a person, but also so I'm just wondering you how long were you a reporter at this paper, and then how do you start getting involved in politics and the other things? Or talk a little bit about that development. Was it around that time or afterwards, or did you exchange papers?
I guess I've worked with quite a few papers. Honestly, just kind of money reasons, I finally decided to get my master's, to go into addictions counseling. I wanted to.
That's interesting.
I wanted to kind of go into mental health counseling honestly first, but then that was going to take longer, and money was an issue. So I went to addiction and substance abuse counseling, and but I didn't want to give up on writing, so I continued to. I kind of started freelancing, and I set out to write a book just kind of on the left.
Yes.
Because I've been closely reading a lot of left-wing arguments over the years, and I was just going to be the U.S. But the more I talked to some people, the more they put me on to other people, and then it kind of transformed into something bigger.
Yeah.
And a lot of the people I talked to changed my perspectives on a lot of things.
That's interesting.
And I'm very appreciative of that. I'm trying to, and some of those folks I really try to stay in contact with. And the one thing about the book is a lot of the people in that book disagree with each other pretty fiercely.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. But
I mean,
there are things.
There's that. I mean, hold that thought. I want to say that there's nobody more divided against itself than the left. The left is very united. You know, they put aside their differences and able to get not us, not we. I'm as guilty as anyone because I have my own views. You know, but you know that's just nature. That's just the nature of. I think it's the nature of being a thinking person. You know, it reminds me of something Hannah Arendt said. Hannah Arendt separates meaning from fact. See, unlike Sam Harris, Hannah Arendt felt that fact couldn't get you to feeling and meaning, which is for her ultimately important. And then interesting, so that relates very much to the thing you were saying earlier about how sense of belonging or sense of purpose is not something that can be rationally, you know, figured out.
Well, I think the funny thing about the new atheist is like, I'm as someone who's more agnostic leaning. The two most influential, probably the two most people, arguably the two most influential people, or maybe even the three most influential people that I read are atheists. They just are not Sam Harris atheists.
Right.
I would say Amartya Sen, Keenan Malik, and Anthony Appiah are three of the most influential people to have influenced me over the years, and they're all. But for me, and they're all very much. I would say they would all be critics of the new atheists.
Well, listeners that don't know, my favorite of the ones you mentioned is Appiah. I think Appiah is a genius, and his
I think Appiah is very good.
Well, his new recent book on identity is brilliant, but I've been reading him for a long time, and so I highly recommend Anthony Appiah to our listeners. But he's brilliant. Yeah, and you know, but he's again kind of like my podcast. He's somebody that's really into the arts. He's into obviously like he knows about all the different culture, and he brings that into his. I think it's very much in the forefront of how he sees the world. I think, and
well, Keenan Malik actually is very much he's a diehard Bob Dylan fan, so he's also that I am too. I'm a huge music fan, so I think sometimes intellectual. I think it is good to be into some of that. I think to kind of be away from him, kind of be cloistered, just totally kind of outside of society can be problematic sometimes. So I think it is good to be not involved in other areas. I think that's healthy, honestly. I think.
You think it's healthy to be well-rounded is what you're saying? Is that?
Yeah. And I think, which I think is one thing where I'm very much, I kind of worry about the discussions we're having about like public education and college education because it seems to be all revolves around, and rightly as it should to some extent, is college setting you up to get a good job, to do your trade, and to make money. But to me, college that's not all college should be about. I mean, it's also about learning to think critically, not how to, not what to think, but like how to think, and learn. To me, college should be a lot more than that. I worry about that.
Are you following some of the more radical left attacks on education itself and meritocracy? I'm thinking of Freddie DeBoer and his research. I'm sure you're familiar with his. I'm not as familiar with him. I've been following. Freddie DeBoer is against compulsory education. I think he's against universal, but from a Marxist perspective. And there are a lot of people, I guess online or associated with the far left that are, whether you agree or disagree, they're doing interesting research about, tracking students but that's connected to his egalitarianism in the sense that, it could create a debt burden. We create this debt burden, and then what do students get at the end of it, right? I'm sure you see the point in that kind of. Well, yeah. I mean, I think there needs to be a I do believe everyone should be able to go to college. I think it should be. Yeah. I do think it should be free. I think it should be structured in a way that it's that like the middle class and the working class is not taxed for that. But I think everyone should be offered that if they have the grades. But I think it should be more than just you do your specialized job, then you make money in that field. I think you should also be taught how to, are these institutions that we have good enough? Do they need to be modified? Do they need to be reformed? Is this the society we want? I mean, I think those bigger questions should be asked too. Right. And I think we should be good. And I think
like, I know there's a lot of attacks on like feminist theory and this kind of stuff, but to me, we should be well-rounded. We should know about the other sex. I mean, the other gender. I mean, to me, these, women's history is important. I mean, how they've gotten rights, that's part of our history. LGBTQ. I think science is very important, but I think scientists should also be learning to write, learn to communicate, because
That's right.
I think now more than ever, we need to make science accessible to everyone, or people like, Tucker Carlson, these other people, and whoever it is on the internet can, be flooding misinformation to people.
Right, it's a big problem. Everybody needs an anchor in life. You, me, just everybody. Anchor made this whole show possible. I'm immensely grateful to them. You too can use Anchor to make your own shows and create your own vision. Download the Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. I mean, I see that problem very acutely from where I sit as well. I appreciate that you're well, getting back to the drug counseling. So I think am I right to guess that you were becoming a drug counselor right at the historical moment when these newer drugs?
Yeah. I mean,
so you must really be, I don't know if expert's the word, you must have been really having seen a need to help people that were really in trouble, right? I mean, I'm very embarrassed to say I'm very much a non-drug person. I'm the squarest person you'll ever meet. I don't drink. I don't smoke. I don't use any drugs, really. I don't even, but I'm not against it. I'm not anti-drug and like I do see it as a problem, but you're someone on the inside, right? You're actually treating people who have problems using substances, correct? And when you learning how to do that or finding out about that, that must have been in the 2000s, or was it in the...
it was, well, I mean, I followed the drug war throughout just from a political standpoint.
Interesting, yeah.
And, I don't agree with it. I don't think it's been done right. I mean, I think, but yeah, it's very worrisome right now. I think, fentanyl is being put into a lot of things.
That's right.
And people are taking these drugs not knowing what's in it. Like they think they're getting methamphetamines, but there's fentanyl in it, and that's causing overdose or crack. They think they're using crack and they die of a fentanyl overdose. So it's a very big problem.
Andy, do you mind telling me a little bit about how you've helped some of your clients, or because I don't really know anything about what someone in your job does, what a drug counselor does, or what you did at that time or now. Just for someone who's doesn't know about it, what would you say, or what?
I mean, a lot of what we teach is just we teach a lot about like stress reduction, coping skills, setting goals. We talk a lot about mindfulness, a lot about we call playing the tape through. Because a lot of people, it's very much, one thing that predisposes someone to addiction, makes you more likely to have an addiction is impulsiveness. So one thing we try to think is like making the cost-benefit analysis before making a decision.
That's right.
We also talk about stress reduction because, when you're in fight or flight, long-term thinking doesn't really kick in. So, and a lot of time in that moment, you'll do anything to relieve the suffering at that time. So we try to work on coping skills so to kind of keep people from getting to that place. Talking about having a sponsor, having someone to call anytime if you're really struggling, if you're ready to break, having someone to call all the time so they can help talk you out of it. Go into support groups so you can have people who have gone through the same thing as you. Just a lot of life, so a lot of emotional regulation. If anger is what triggers you to use, or if stress, and finding other ways to de-stress. If drugs was your original coping mechanism to do that.
Well, you were learning how to help people in a time when. Were you seeing your community you were living in hit hard by some of these drugs, or was that going on?
And where I live, Des Moines, I would say we see probably the drug we see the most one of the drugs we see the most of is methamphetamines. I got hit pretty hard with that.
Yeah.
That's when we see a lot in the communities.
Yeah.
And fentanyl is a worry right now because one of the problems is, like I said, one of the problems is not that people are directly like buying fentanyl or asking for it. It's just that it's been contaminated in so many of these drugs. So people are getting drugs in the street, and they're ingesting them, taking them, snorting them, injecting them, not knowing what's in them. The Biden administration has put out, I don't know if they're mass produced. I don't know if it's been accepted, but but I know there's been a plan. There's been talk of fentanyl testing strips, so people who are actively using can tell if fentanyl is in the drug they're going to use before they use it. There's kind of a movement, and right now in my field, for more harm reduction as opposed to just abstinence only. Like in some places, they're having safe.
I know a little bit about that distinction because when I lived in Boston, I used to hang out with some although I myself describe myself as square, I did from time to time hang out with people who were very opposite that, and were very one of whom was, I think, one of the founders of harm reduction. I think she was, but that was in the context, I guess, of heroin. I think maybe applied to other things as well, of course, but.
Yeah, a lot of times with harm reduction, people needle exchanges.
That's right.
Now they're in some places. I think New York has some now. Like supervised injection sites where people can use their drugs in a controlled setting.
That's right.
So they know it's not contaminated with something.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think this is the idea behind it. Is this: these are people who are not ready to stop yet. So let's make sure they're still, let's make sure they don't overdose, that they don't lose their lives before they have time to heal, before they're ready to heal.
That must be a very controversial, because even though it's very necessary in life, it's actually life-preserving, which it must be a tough sell in certain.
Sure, because there's we even have that problem with MAT medication. It's medication-assisted treatment, like Suboxone, and methadone, which can help decrease cravings for heroin. Even that, some people say, well, that's one drug for another, and some people, old school people, will say, like, don't take any medications. That's just one drug for another. That's just one chemical drug for another. And I guess for me, it's just like, okay, but if this person is using this, and maybe instead of having an overdose, instead of losing their family. They're with their family. They have a functioning job. They're not having to go to the hospital. If they're functioning in society well, to me, that is an improvement than, getting drugs in the street, perhaps overdosing, going to the hospital. And that's kind of the pragmatic idea of the harm reduction. And I just think it's more humane. I do think there is. I don't know. I think with Al Capone, we said,
oh boy.
To me, prohibition led to him, and I think we're still. I'm not convinced that we're ever going to cut off the supply. I think the demand is what's going to have to go, and to me, that's the kind of society we have. That's how we treat people who do have addictions.
Right.
It's not gonna. I don't think you're just gonna. Like, even if, like, say, Mexico got cut off from prevent cartels got shut down there. I mean, historically, they've just ballooned another country.
Spraying up somewhere else is what you're saying?
Yeah. I mean, that's been kind of the history. So I wish that weren't the case, but it's kind of been the way it's been.
It's really difficult because you're talking about people's enjoyment they get from these chemicals and they're from their point of view. I remember I had a friend of mine who used, and she used to have a really strange joke. I thought it was really funny, but when I tell people the joke, they get very offended. So I hope this podcast doesn't. But it is a colorful story. She said that she was. She told me she had to go to some suburb to score, and she told me that she really hated what she called. This was her term for it, the family values dealers. I guess by which she meant these were very conservative, upstanding people who sold heroin. And she says they were the worst, like, because they were always, what was her complaint? Oh, yeah, that they were always, like, late all the time, that they were unreliable. The PTA dealers. She says, I really hate the PTA dealers because everything's a pain in the ass, and they always have to go, that's right, they always have to go pick up their kid before they deal, in an SUV. And I thought that was just such a colorful, that of course, she was comfortable enough with me to tell me these stories, and I thought it was hysterically funny, but I'm sure that joke wouldn't land. I'm sure there are many circles where that would be horrifying, right? Because they would have to. The idea of somebody going to a PTA meeting and then selling heroin in a suburb, of course, is bad. But it's also
yeah. Well, I mean, the media depiction of the drug user is not always accurate. I mean, I've had certainly clients who one time had a house, had big job, we're doing really well, and then lost it all. I mean. I think one good way for people to look at addiction who don't totally understand it is like, I heard some guy, there's actually a lady who wrote a book that I want to read. I hear it's a very good one. Ann Lemke is her name. Huh. It's called Dopamine Brain. It's kind of called Finding Balance in the Age of Indulgence.
Interesting.
And she kind of talked about how like our brains are wired to seek pleasure to avoid pain.
That's right.
Because like in the past, that was meant, seek pleasure to get water, to get food, for sex, for things that like helped us to survive.
Very primitive,
but
things, right?
Yeah, but when that pleasure comes from heroin, you get like super pleasure, and you continue to do it.
Right.
Then your brain keeps telling you need more and more. So when in the past the brain was like giving us messages to help us survive, now it's providing people messages that can help kill them. So it's and the one thing she talked about too with dopamine, with the addiction process, is that, and this is one thing I always tell my clients, is like drug addiction, alcohol addiction, like shouldn't be siloed off from like the rest of the addictions, because people can get addicted to anything. I mean, some people can get addicted to a person. Some people get addicted to pornography. Some people get addicted to sex. I think right now a lot of people are addicted to their cell phones. Some people are addicted to social media. And the way people get addicted is generally the same thing.
Yeah.
Like you talked about, like there's one part of the brain where the part of the brain that processes pleasure is about the same part of the brain that processes pain.
Mm-hmm.
And she basically said when people overindulge on one side, it sometimes can eventually create like a dopamine deficit state where, and that's kind of can get bad because people who, like say, get really hooked on heroin, sometimes what they used to enjoy, the things they used to enjoy, stop being enjoyable because they're in this dopamine deficit state. And the one thing that's giving them enjoyment maybe isn't as much, they start doing more. And then you get this kind of life where it's this kind of progressive narrowing of what gives a person pleasure, where it just becomes one thing.
That's right.
And that can happen to people with a shopping addiction or an eating addiction. And the same way it can happen to someone with a heroin addiction. Heroin is just more potent. So, I mean, that's kind of one way to look at it.
I should say that, my friend did eventually get clean. So I went to visit her. She was staying in some kind of house with very strict rules, and they had a statue of the Buddha. And she seemed to be doing better, but she's someone who had been using for 50 years. She was in her, in her 60s. And I guess you would fit the definition of a functional user, right? Or a user who's not.
Yeah, functional. There are different degrees of addiction. I mean, there's mild, moderate, severe. And
it's interesting.
It's and a lot of people do get better, and most people do.
That's news. I mean,
sometimes it takes like 5 or 6 times though. It's just different with each person.
Yeah. I want to get back to your book a little bit, if you don't mind, because first of all, the scope of it, as I said, is remarkable. You talk to so many people in all the continents, and I'm sure that was the book. I guess it was organized that way because I think you wanted to. You're somebody. You said you haven't traveled a lot, but in this book, you've traveled everywhere. You've talked to everybody. People in North Africa, people in Korea. What comes to your mind when you think about that accomplishment, or how you went about, or just how you went about meeting so many of these people and getting their opinion or their perspective? That's interesting to me.
Yeah, I think. Well, I wanted to. First of all, I wanted to kind of I felt like left on some things. I was kind of one of the problems with the left sometimes was bothered me is what kind of a lot of people I talk to. I mean, some people, I guess I'd call it like imperial anti-imperialism is kind of when I think I saw this in like, to me, in my opinion, this happened in Syria and Bosnia.
That's right.
And Kosovo to extent, like where kind of the people on the ground become kind of victims, or they become, I mean, they're kind of distorted to fit the narrative of people like in the U.S. And I thought, I wanted to talk to the people on the ground, left-wing people, or even just progressive, or even just pro-democracy people who lived through it. And sometimes I felt like the left did not. I mean, there are some tremendous activists in Syria who I don't think the left talked to, or I just think instead of, I think the left kind of ignored or didn't go down and talk to or to create bonds with. That bothered me. It seemed like that happened in Bosnia too, just looking back on some of the reporting on that.
We've talked to these people, correct? You've talked to some. Yeah,
Yassin Al-Haj Saleh is, in my opinion, is one of the best writers and intellectuals on the planet.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, very much a universal thinker, brilliant, one of the most empathetic people I've ever met from everything he's gone through. I mean, the guy's 15 years in the Syrian prison.
Wow.
Still one of the most caring people I have ever spoken to or interviewed. I mean, most of it was email, honestly. Even if you didn't want extra arming of the Syrians, or if you you were worried about that, I still wish there was more solidarity or more reaching out to the people in those countries. That the lack of doing that, I thought, by some people on the left was bothersome.
Mm-hmm.
I'd say the same for Bosnia and some other places. I just because I'm not saying like someone cannot. I'm not at all saying you can't form bonds with people in Syrian left or Syrian pro-democracy people and still oppose certain types of U.S. intervention there. But I think the lack of talking to those people or accepting certain narratives where those people were kind of erased or just kind of as passive victims was really problematic.
Right. Well, it is, and it's interesting. You cite this one person as really is exemplary, and I guess they influenced your thinking and opened up your consciousness to seeing things in a different way, a new way. And I think that's interesting. So I do think a lot of these disagreements, if I could formulate it in this kind of, maybe it's a strange way, but I have my core ideals, which are very radical, like as radical as can be, without being arrested, right? So in that sense, I'm very, very far left. For example, I'm completely anti-capitalist, which means I'm against all sort of global international orders that have existed, right? That's an ideal. I'm opposed to them, right? That's what puts me in a lot of conflict with progressives who support such order, right, and who are more conservative, right? That's a fundamental ideal. However, in my daily life, I completely put aside those ideals, given certain contexts, right? So the kind of things you're talking about now, like having a livable city, not, being free from being bombed by somebody, and that's my opinion that you should keep the ideals in the back of your mind, but that's not the time and place to push for those ideals, because in that moment, that's not what's salient, right? And so for me, that's how I navigate. To me, they're separate issues. And I find sometimes activists, they're only operating through the one ideal they might have, right? Rather than through the circumstance or the context, right? So the kind of things you're talking about are real pressing needs, like say in Serbia, right? Like, it's sad. A good example of that, I guess, would be the support for Milosevic, of all people, among some radicals, that just because Milosevic is against your enemy, right, as well.
Well, yeah, that's definitely...
That's the kind of thing I do oppose. So there are instances in which I will ally with people I really disagree with fundamentally, because I need to ally with them because to accomplish a certain goal. For example, if the goal is to make sure Ukraine doesn't get destroyed, a basic goal like that. So I'm going to I'm definitely going to ally with the Madeleine Albrights of the world and the conservative foreign policy think tanks because they don't like Putin either, right? So I think it's just everything.
Yeah.
It's about picking your battles or picking your.
Well, I think sometimes we forget the and, like U.S. hegemony has been a problem, and there's been some serious issues, and Putin is still a dictator who is guilty of war crimes. I mean, I think sometimes, of course, those two things can exist at the same time.
Yeah, it's both. It's either or. It's both and, right? It's a both and, as you say. But what are some of the other names in this book? And you mentioned this in different continents that come to your mind where you think, wow, that person really kind of, I don't know if it blew you away or made you look at something in a way you hadn't considered before, maybe, or inspired you? Or?
I think Meredith Tax is great. I love Meredith.
Yeah.
I think just some of the like I said, Yasin, some of the Korean voices, Liberty North Korea. I mean,
wow.
To me, that the people who were trying to, kind of like, we're trying to rescue people from North Korea, get them into South Korea. I mean, to me, that's great. That's a great thing. I think Tista Settlevad, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, and her husband.
Are you talking about Sokil Park?
Yeah, Sokil Park. Yeah.
That was an interview. That one struck me. I wasn't actually anticipating that. I mean, along the book, and when I got to him, that was something. That was something.
Yeah, I mean, he's probably Tista Settlevad. I think Deep Seda. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. She is a peace activist in Pakistan. Just an incredible woman. Just promoting peace between India and Pakistan. I think she's great. I think so. I don't know. Just like everyone, Annabelle Hernandez, I think, is a heroic figure in Mexico. But just Ana Maria Cafino in Guatemala. I mean, just some of these people are incredible figures. Wish they were more well known. And yeah. I mean, all those people I really enjoyed talking to. George Monbiot, he's definitely someone I've admired for years. I like him. I like his column in The Guardian. So it was definitely good to talk to him. Miriam Healy Lucas, definitely. I really enjoy talking to the female activists in the kind of Middle East, North Africa, because they provide. I think they are good for people on the left here to read, because I think, to me, Islamist extremism is a problem in a lot of areas of the world. But at the same time, anti-Muslim bigotry is also very much a problem. And I think people like Miriam, who have lived through a civil war in Algeria where she saw many of her friends murdered by Islamist extremists, I think can kind of hold a mirror to us on that and kind of say, look, you need to concentrate on both things. I don't think it's but I think people like her get it right, where people like Harris get it, people like Sam Harris do not.
Totally wrong.
But to me, it's not a Islam thing, because you look in Burma, and that's where extremist Buddhists are committing genocide.
Hold that. I have something. So Harris keeps extolling Kirstie Ali, who's married to the neoconservative economist. His name slips me. He's a major Neo Ferguson, right?
Ferguson, yeah.
Ferguson, but I mean, he holds them up. But Miriam Lucas, whose photo can't be reproduced in your book for her own safety, right?
Yeah.
Her story is infinitely more interesting than to me. I mean, I was very infinitely more interesting.
And Kirstie Ali,
or like her.
You know, I admire her courage. I admire what she's doing on behalf of women, but I totally disagree with some of her politics. And I think with Harris boosting her, I guess my problem is, and a lady named Karima Bonone, again, I hope I got that pronounced right. She wrote a book called Your Fatwa Does Not Apply Here, where she talks about thousands of Muslim women and men, some secular, some progressive Muslims, who have given their life fighting Islamist extremism.
That's right.
And these people are have much more credibility, solidarity among Muslims and in this country than Hirsi Ali, yet I never heard Harris talking about these people or interviewing them or putting them up. And because many of them are very much also opposed to imperialism, to U.S. imperialism.
That's right.
So to me, that's the mistake, and it's wrong. I think that's wrong in my opinion.
That's connected to my comment about one's ideals. I mean, if your ideals don't allow, you have to have your core ideals, even though you can't always live. You know, you have to suspend them sometimes, right? But imperialism is imperialism, and one must oppose it. Even though opposing it might mean sometimes having to collaborate with forces you don't like to defeat something worse, right? Which is and I think in the I think too with imperialism too, I think we need to. Of course, you can point out things, and you always could have. I mean, with Britain imperialism in India, you certainly could point out stuff in Indian society that was bad then, just like you can point to things in U.S. society that's bad now. It doesn't mean if someone invaded the U.S. that would be justified. Right. It doesn't. Yeah, it's very very intelligent thinking. But I sort of feel like there's an Indian philosopher I really love, Akhil Bagrami. Do you know him or read him?
I don't know him.
Akhil Bagrami is one of the greatest living commentators on Gandhi. And he kind of blends Gandhi with postmodern, quasi-modernist European philosophy, which is Gandhi's opposite, right, in many respects. But he's a wonderful scholar. I think he's writing a new book on Gandhi, but I like his ideas very much. He's somebody who, Akhil Bagrami is somebody who talks about the need to be in one's own village or one's own local society, and how, he talks about how Gandhi was really a deep political thinker, but was like a mystic and visionary, very similar to almost like a Ralph Waldo Emerson. There's a kind of a spiritualist Tolstoyan dimension.
Yeah, Emerson.
But according to Akhil Bagrami, that aspect of Gandhi is actually very politically intelligent, even though it appears as an
anti-politics,
right? But that's because Gandhi's saying who needs laws, who needs contracts, Gandhi's saying is that we need to get kind of in touch with our feelings, and all this emphasis on principle and law is kind of stultifying and rigid. And I didn't mean to go on for so long, but definitely check out Akhil Bagrami. He's an interesting political philosopher, very interesting.
Yeah, I will have to check him out. I don't know too much about him. I mean, I guess full disclosure, I guess I would consider myself in the rationalist camp, but I can say I lack much knowledge of postmodernism to really say one way or the other on some things.
Yeah.
I read Foucault something, and I found it hard to penetrate. So, I think it was about I believe it was about the medicalization. It was about kind of mental health and.
So did you read Madison Civilization, or the birth of the Clinic?
Perhaps. I'm trying to.
I mean, both.
Perhaps I did.
Both the Birth of the Clinic and Madison Civilization are. Again, I'm partly a Foucaultian, so that's my wheelhouse, right? Or among the greatest certainly works coming out of France in 60 years. In my opinion, brilliant. But it's hard to penetrate my I don't know if I don't give advice often, but I would say go back and look at it. He has a totally different way of looking at reality than someone like Well, than English type folks, than policy analysts, right? It's almost the opposite.
Yeah.
But,
what was
you should also hold that thought. You should also check out late Foucault, because late Foucault is getting interested in Christianity, Stoicism, the ancient Cynics, and Foucault gets much more interested in self-help and self-care. So there's different stages to his thought, but he gets unfairly maligned because people don't understand what he means by power. His own special meaning of these terms, For Foucault, everything is power, meaning that everything is ultimately about wills exerting effort on the world. And that's connected to the idea that everything is interpretation. And so, it's almost beside the point to try to say, well, whether that's reasonable or not. Because for Foucault, you're always exerting your power, right? That's the easy part. The hard part is, what is the quality of that power, right? That's the tricky part. That's the question: is that you can have good power for good and power for bad, right?
I guess what I worry about with that kind of thought is, I think I worry how many people could penetrate something like that. And I've always been kind of make things accessible to the multitudes, for the lack of a better term.
Yeah.
And I worry about things being so abstract that people have trouble penetrating. I think the more things become accessible to everyone, I think that's that's kind of one of the things I did like about the Enlightenment, that I guess I wouldn't be a pro-Enlightenment person, is just the idea that there's this idea that reason that we could reason, like everything could, like education and certain things could be brought to everyone.
Right.
And it was kind of a blowback to these kings do not have these kings and princes don't have divine grace, and they don't have divine intelligence over everyone else. Everyone can have these same tools.
It was Foucault who said that we have not cut off the head of the king. That's one of his famous quotes. We've never succeeded in doing so. Speaking of kings, that was one of his famous quotes. Also, his lectures at the Collège de France were attended by the masses of French people. He was like a rock star and a celebrity. And so I think for those people, because they're educated in that, for them it's accessible, because they're actually trained to understand. That's a whole French thing, and I would say that's in the U.S. we really don't have that. We don't have that kind of education in the language.
Wasn't Albert Camus? Wasn't he?
Who
was Camus?
Yeah.
Wasn't he? I found The Rebel to be a tremendous book.
Well, Camus, I love Camus. Don't get me started on Camus, because I'll talk your ear off. Camus was ahead of everybody else. Wasn't it Camus that really called BS on Stalinism, the first opponent of Stalinism in France, when France was overwhelmingly still slavish towards the Soviet Union? Wasn't it Camus, one of the earlier people to say, this is wrong, or this is what's going on over?
I always kind of considered him. He seemed kind of like the Orwell of France to me.
So very much so, yeah.
And I'm a huge Orwell person. I think he's.
Oh yeah.
I think his writing beats the pass of time.
You expressed a very Orwellian view when you talked about clarity in language. That's very much politics of the English language of like.
Oh yeah, I think that's a tremendous
George
article.
Was very worried about elites putting things over on people through obfuscation and tricks, tricks, and all that. I think, even though I don't accept Orwell's notion at all of clarity, I think clarity. I'm an aesthete. I don't believe in clarity, but clarity has its uses. But I take his point. If I'm going to enter into Orwell's view, I guess
I worry with the talk about reality is I worry with the far right with. I do believe it's kind of objective. Like with science, I realize one truth is the same as other truths, and I don't. That's a worry to me, because I think, I guess for me, these guys doing research for all these years, I do put their knowledge above someone who hasn't.
Oh, sure.
I don't put them as better, but I put them as more knowledgeable.
Absolutely. But you've been a reporter, so you understand. I would guess you probably have experienced the consequence of bad information. I mean, you might have actually reported on it. I imagine in your work as a journalist, I'm sure you've encountered people with false information doing the wrong thing.
Yeah.
Or getting found into trouble. I don't know what comes to mind, an example that you could think of.
I just worry very much about the charismatic figure who is also amoral, which to me is what Trump was. I think it's what Tucker Carlson is. I think it's I think it's what a lot of cult leaders are. I mean, and it's those people worry me.
Do you watch many documentaries on? There's been a lot of recent documentaries on cults, and do you have any? I worry about that. I worry about that there could be like a rise in that and a rise in militias right now. I'm worried about this levels in the U.S. of loneliness and anxiety going up, and this level of loneliness going up. But I'm worried that I do kind of partly agree with or worry that, like Eric Fromm, writing "Escape from Freedom" is correct. That if some people don't have that meaning, that purpose, and belonging, and that beliefs, that they will find something, and sometimes what they find is not as bad. Sometimes it can be a cult. Sometimes it can be something. It can be the dark figures of the internet. And I worry that people who are adrift right now could end up in that kind of situation. And that's why I think it does worry me about, like, with church attendance and like Rotary Club and like kind of neighborliness going down. Like, I'm not saying it has to be religion or that kind of. Or I'm saying it needs to be something to me. Oh, yeah. There are places there needs to be some sense of purpose, some sense of belonging. And I think if some people don't stand up, and if we don't try to come up with organizations and groups that are inclusive, then other people are going to replace it with more exclusive groups where you may have in-group amity, but there's this between-group apathy. That is something I worry about. I have a feeling that it's not just worry, that you've experienced things in your reporting or seen a lot.
Oh yeah. I mean, I saw. I'm not going to name names, but I definitely saw friends. Some people I knew who kind of, I guess during the Trump era, I saw them go down kind of the conspiracy raffle, and then
that's right.
And not only did it disappointed me, but I kind of felt bad for them because it didn't seem like a happy life, just angry at the world and kind of this feeling like these small forces of people behind the curtain are controlling everything, and kind of this constant anger. I mean, that to me, that's not a happy way to go about things. Right. And that was kind of sad to see. I didn't cut off anybody totally, but I kind of, I didn't respond. I just kind of was like, this is something I just didn't want to bring up because I just felt bad. I mean, I had people who I was friends with who I saw that.
Cut off somebody because of their Trumpiness. I mean, sometimes you have to. I mean, of course, everybody's there. Which is, I just didn't want to deal with that, But
it wasn't just the post-Trumpism. It was
other things.
Kind of this hatred and divorce from reality. I mean, you can just say like a Nancy Pelosi just for their policies, but the woman's not Satan. I mean, it's like this is caricature that grew up in people's heads about people
she was almost murdered a year ago. It's very close to her being literally killed or beaten to death or hung. They were trying to do that. So that's a very, I just mentioned that because you mentioned it, but that's a very, where you must be in a very strange time when that's your national politics where.
Well, I think people, I think sometimes people without any sense of belonging to, you can kind of, if you find your source and unfortunately some people find their identity in hating other people, and that's a bad part of human nature. I think, but I don't think it has to be that way. But I think some people, maybe it's more immoral people like a Trump, will play to people's base instincts to get that.
I think a lot of it could be jealousy of her because she's so together. She's so stylish, and she's so she's actually kind of likable and very and maybe those qualities that she has that I find personally likable maybe that's like, maybe people feel that they lack that in themselves. So it could be maybe jealousy. I don't know, put it that way.
I've always thought it was just more that she is,
psychologically.
I think she's just, I think in some of the far right, maybe conservative kind of imagination, she's kind of become a symbol of all that's wrong, all that's decadent, all that's evil. And
I'm saying that there's a dimension to that symbolism that's rooted in this resentment, because they themselves are bad thinkers and lack style and lack dignity. So it's actually, and they know that. That's just, I mean, that's one. Both interpretations could be okay, but I think there is an element of.
But I think like
yeah.
But I think just being someone who, because I remember in Colby, I think someone called her like Nazi Pelosi or something.
Yeah, that's, you know.
But like, I think if, you know, the funny thing is, and because I live in places, you know, very right wing. I think if someone like Nancy Pelosi or someone like visited some of these families and they had dinner, or like for a couple of days, they actually talked about stuff other than politics, they probably understand the hatred I think there's a good chance a lot of hatred would go away.
Oh yeah.
But you know.
Well, that's the yeah, but that's the problem is our politics. See, I don't really like politics very much. I'm not a big fan, I have to say, of politics. I'm just full disclosure. I'm just not a political junkie. I'm not a news junkie. I'm very moderation in my politics. My politics is not modern. I'm a radical, but I'm moderate about my radicalism. Like I don't read the news 24/7, and I'm not. So I sort of feel like the thing you're talking about now, that's just the human connection. That's what, that's what my podcast is all about. Because I have the idea that, you know, my podcast, if I get poets that write in poetry in different styles and two different style musicians and bring them to the same table, those differences will be less important than what they have in common, like trying to get a recording contract or creating an album or, you know, just basic, you know, basic things in life, you know, in a way. So I'm more interested in you're right. But I think it's a lack of personal connection. So in a way, because people are cut off on that, they invent a demon. They invent fantasies, you know, kind of about people, right?
Well, I think Amartya Sen wrote a book called, it was called Identity and Violence. It was called The Illusion of Destiny, Identity and Violence.
That's a great book.
Have you ever read that? Yeah.
Really great. I love that book. I didn't know we'd be talking about it, but I thought
that was, I thought when he talked about how we all have multiple identities and like a lot of times violence breaks out when people are convinced they only have one identity and kind of like, and that identity requires them to be hostile to or towards or treat as inferior someone with another presumed identity. I think that does get to the heart of why a lot of violence happens. I think that and fear. I think the interesting thing to see with like a lot of people who join these fascist movements and stuff is like, on the one hand, you see this fury, this anger, but on the other hand side, you also hear this like kind of sense of grievance and sense of fear, even when a lot of times it's totally without reason. I mean, sometimes you'll see the fear of immigration and refugees strongest in a town where there are no refugees and there are no immigrants, you know. It's like the suburbs where it's mostly white people and like, you know, there's hardly anyone that they're hearing about on TV. So it is kind of a weird thing. Even sometimes like a Trump or Putin, like even while they're committing crimes, like, or they're engaging in horrible behavior, they still seem to see themselves as the victim. And it's kind of a weird phenomenon.
You know, Andy, I understand that you're going to be a father soon, right? You're
Yeah.
So my plan in the next years is that I think you your wife, I could show you around the Northeast. You could come to New York and we'll taking a show.
Oh, I'd love to visit the Northeast.
Yeah, we should plan on doing that. So with your baby, the newborn, what before we conclude in the show, because even good things come to an end, is there anything else you want to say about politics or reporting or the future or what's on your mind?
Well, I just think politically, I just think I think one of my, I kind of believe that I guess what they call the neoliberal model I think there needs to be, I feel like if we just stick with that model right now, that could be trouble, because I don't think it's fulfilling enough purpose for enough people. And I'm worried if there's no changes, there's a chance that too many people are going to pick that fascist model. And that's one of the things that worries me right now. I hope I'm wrong. Because I would prefer the neoliberal model over the fascist model.
Sure.
Absolutely.
Sure, yeah.
But I do worry about, I hope some of the people who think this is like the last gasp, and some of these, I hope that is correct. But I worry. I do worry with some of the signs we are seeing right now. In different places.
You're covering it in your work, and you're seeing it up close, probably in a way that I'm not. So I appreciate you.
I think with the left, I guess the last thing I'd say was like a progressives. I do think we need to work on our messages. I do think we need to foster kind of a politics of belonging, a politics of purpose, and a politics of inclusivity. Within our countries and across borders. I think that's important. I think we should argue and contest, but also unite around important issues. Mm-hmm. I think we really need to right now because, there are other people who are there are other people with forming groups and powers that I think that are a threat to democracy. I think that are effect to values that we all kind of cherish. And I just think, I think, if neoliberalism is in trouble, it could go one way that way, or it could go another way where I think life could get better for a lot of people. We could find more meaning in our lives, but, and more people could feel like they're more in a democratic society where we all, are allowed to flourish. But I think, we need to really work on our message and work on our sense of belonging, kind of purpose, having a big tent, willing to talk about tough issues without biting each other's heads off. Because, the right is serious. Some of the far right are not playing around. So I think there is an urgency there.
Yep. I agree. And I'm glad to hear you say that on our show. And you're this is, been Andy Heintz, the author of The Dissidents of the International Left, reporter, drug counselor, journalist. This was a beautiful occasion. I'm glad we had the time to get into some of these things. And I thank you very much for your generosity and for being on our show, Andy.
Yeah, thanks so much, Mitch. It was an honor to be on. I really, really enjoyed it.
Yep. We'll do it again soon. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Mitch.
Bye.
Bye.
I don't like goodbyes, so I'll see you soon, folks. Thank you.